Hello, this is Ryan Kurzak of Asheville Vedic Astrology. Today we're going to talk about planetary dignity, which is a fundamental principle in Vedic astrology that's often overlooked and not utilized enough. This is a simple principle, and what it will allow you to do is to very accurately determine the different areas of a person's life and whether they'll be good, bad, well supported, or not. And this is based on a combination of a planet's natural status, its natural friendship to its lord, as well as its temporary relationship to its lord. And we'll get to that in a minute, just how you figure these things out. But we need to understand, how does dignity work? Well, dignity is going to allow us to see if certain areas of our life, when we research those areas, if they're going to give good or bad karma. For example, if we have the ruler of the fifth house in bad dignity, that can give trouble with creativity, trouble with speculative investments. It can give trouble with children, difficulties with children. And then when we're assessing that aspect of a chart, when we're considering, okay, we have the ruler of the fifth house in the seventh, so we have the ruler of children in the seventh house, and we know that the fifth house represents children, we know that the seventh house represents relationships, and we know that the fifth house is in bad dignity, the lord of the fifth house is in bad dignity. That's going to show that children, our creative endeavors or romantic affairs, all these things represented by the fifth house, are going to cause problems for our relationship, because the lord of the fifth is in bad dignity, influencing the seventh. And we can do this with any house. We can do this with any area of life. So let's figure out, how do we determine the dignity of a planet? Well, if you have software that does it, like for example, I use Kala, and if you look over here, let's see, on the right, I've got a birth chart, and I have the dignities. And this gives me the dignities in all of the vargas. This is very helpful because this allows me to see how each planet's going to work, each house lord is going to work effectively in all of the vargas. But if you don't have that, you need to figure out on your own. It's a simple thing. However, it does take a little bit of memorization. And the first thing you have to memorize is the natural relationships of all of the planets. Seems like a lot, and it was overwhelming to me as well. But over time, the more that you look at it, the easier it becomes. So let's take the moon, for example. If you have a good book on Vedic astrology, and if you get The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, which is the book that Richard Fish and I wrote, I believe it's page 56 or 58, there's a table there that deals with the natural friendships, and it's just something you have to memorize. Get a good book, memorize that. You can also probably go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com and use the search function, and I do believe I've posted that table up there, and it'll tell you what they are. But let's start with the moon. So the moon, from memorizing that chart, I know that the moon is a natural neutral with Mars. And Mars rules Aries, which is the sign that the moon is in. And so we have to know that, the natural state of things. Now the temporal friendship, that's based on a series of just some basic rules. And that rule, again, you have to memorize. When a planet is in, so let's take the moon here, we need to consider the placement of its lord from the planet in consideration. So if Mars would have been in the second, the third, the fourth from the moon, or if Mars would have been in the 10th, 11th, or 12th from the moon, that would have made Mars a temporary friend. So that's how you find the temporary status. If the lord is in the second, third, or fourth, or if the lord of the planet in question is in the 10th, 11th, or 12th, that's a temporary friend status. Then what we do is we combine these two things. A planet that is natural neutral plus a planet that is temporary friend gets the dignity of friend. If the moon would have been a natural friend to Mars, then we would have had a natural friend plus a temporary friend, which would have gave us a great friend, which is a higher dignity, a better dignity, just below Mula Trikona and exaltation. Now, We also need to know, how do you figure out if a planet is in a temporal enemy's sign? And that rule is simple as well. Temporal enemy is when the Lord, so from the moon, the Lord of the moon, is in the first, is in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th. This makes a temporary enemy. And so we know the moon is natural neutral to Mars. So natural neutral plus temporary enemy gives us an enemy. If the moon would have been in natural enemy sign, then temporal enemy plus natural enemy would give us a great enemy, which is a worse dignity, lower dignity. And what we see here is that for the moon is in the same sign as Mars. The moon is in a natural neutral relationship with Mars, and so that should make moon in an enemy's sign, enemy dignity. We go down here to dignities and vargas. We look at the first varga. We see we have an E underneath moon for first varga, which shows that yes, it is in an enemy sign. Now this seems complicated, and really it's just memorization. So if you memorize these rules, if you look at a lot of charts and see how they work out, it'll easily sink in. And this principle forms the foundation for so many other important techniques and other ways of assessing the astrological chart. So you really got to get this down first. And even if you don't go beyond this, you're still going to get a lot of good information from the chart, more so than people who don't understand how this works. Okay, so let's go ahead and consider the moon here. So we have the moon, which rules the 5th house. We see that the 5th house lord is in the 2nd. Now, we consider, what does that mean? Well, there's a number of things that the 5th house lord in the 2nd can represent. Some of them good, some of them bad. Some good indications can show a person who gets a lot of love and a lot of support from children. It can give a happy early childhood, because the 2nd house represents early childhood, and the 5th house is a very auspicious house. It's a trinal house. It can give success in speculative investments with things that deal with food or speech or even with the government, because again, the 2nd house represents our resources. 5th house can represent the government or speculative investment, and the 2nd house can represent food and speech. So those are the positive things. The negative things, it can give difficulty supporting children. 5th house in the 2nd, difficulty supporting children. It can give complications with the government or large corporations. It can give tax problems. It can make a person dishonest or self-seeking. All these things which are negative. But we have to figure out, which way is it going to go? So you look this up, you research it, you see all these possibilities, but you can't quite understand which way it's going to go. Well, it is the dignity which is going to tell you predominantly which way it's going to go. Moon is in an enemy sign, so all those negative things that we talked about, that's what comes out here. If we look and we see that Saturn here, Saturn is in Cancer, and we need to understand, what are the natural friendships of Saturn? Well, Saturn is naturally friendly to Mercury, or has natural friendship with Mercury and Venus. It's a natural neutral to Jupiter, and it's in a natural enemy sign to Sun, Moon, and Mars. So we know that Saturn is in an enemy sign naturally. But now let's figure out, what is it temporally? So where is the lord of Saturn? So if we count around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The moon is in the 10th house from Saturn. So the lord of Saturn's in the 10th from Saturn. And if we remember our rules, planets that are in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, or in the 10th, 11th, or 12th, so the lord of that planet in these houses, that's going to make it a temporary friend. So we see that the relationship between Moon and Saturn, temporary from Saturn's perspective, is that of a friend. Now we have an enemy, a natural enemy, plus a temporal friend. And that makes neutral. That makes a neutral dignity. If we go down here to the dignities and vargas, we see that yes, Saturn is in a neutral dignity. So what does that mean? That means that when you're considering what Saturn means in the 5th house, when we consider the houses that Saturn rules, which is the 11th and the 12th, the 11th, our ability to network, to get along with influential people, to really fulfill our dreams, and it's also a house of income. And the 12th house, the ability to manage our debts well, that Saturn's going to have a neutral capacity to do that. So he's going to be average. If Saturn would have been in a good dignity, it would have showed he had a lot of strength, a lot of ability to take care of these houses. And we see that Saturn's in a neutral sign in the 5th house, which means that he's going to have a neutral impact on 5th house affairs. If Saturn would have been in a great enemy sign, then how would we have interpreted that? Well, if Saturn would have been in a great enemy sign, then we would have known that the 12th house, which is the ability to manage our debts, would have had a really negative impact on children, 5th house affairs. 11th house, social involvements. If Saturn was in an enemy sign or debilitation or great enemy sign, then social involvements would have a very powerfully negative impact on our children, on our speculative investments, on our spiritual practices. All these things that the 5th house represents. If Saturn would have been in a great friend sign, Mula Trikona, or exaltation sign, then the things that Saturn rules, these houses that Saturn rules, would have had a very powerful, profound, positive impact on one's children, on one's creativity, on one's speculative investments. So this is one way that you can look at a chart and get a good sense of how the different areas of a life, how the different areas of a person's life are going to play out. And beyond that, you're not just going to be able to say children are bad or finances are bad. You're going to be able to say where is the difficulty coming from, or where is the support coming from. And that support, if it's planets in a good dignity, will be coming from the houses that it rules. If the planet's in bad dignity, then the difficulty will be coming from the houses that it rules. Okay, so again, simple ways of understanding this. But you do have to know what the houses mean to make this work. You do have to know the dignities, and in general, you also have to know what the planets themselves indicate just by their natural indications. So we have to have that background information that is required for astrology to work, such as the meanings of the houses, the meanings of the signs, the meanings of the planets. Step 1, memorize that. Next step, learn these dignities, learn the natural friendships, get the art and science of Vedic astrology, memorize that table, then learn this rule of temporal friendships. And again, we'll do that one more time. Temporal friendships from the planet in question, so from Saturn, if we're looking at Saturn, to figure out the the temporary friendship. If the ruler of Saturn would have been in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, or in the 10th, 11th, or 12th, that planet becomes a natural friend. If the planet in question, so if we had the moon here in the same sign, because the moon rules Saturn, if the moon was in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th, then that would have made it a temporary enemy. And we add together the natural relationships, and we add together the temporal relationships, and this tells us how the planet's going to work in the chart. That's for the Rashi, the main birth chart. This also tells us how the planets are going to work in all of the vargas, because as you see here, for each of the vargas, each planet has a different dignity. And this is important because, for example, when you're doing predictive astrology, you might see in the birth chart that Jupiter is in a great enemy sign. And that can allow you to see that within the birth chart, when someone goes into a Jupiter dasha, those things that Jupiter represents aren't going to do too well. They're going to have some difficulties, some problems. However, just by looking at the birth chart, you're not going to get the full picture, because as we see in this particular chart, Jupiter is exalted in the 10th divisional chart, which is the chart of career, which shows that when the person goes into a Jupiter dasha, even though the outer life might not be too pleasant, or the things that Jupiter represents in the Rashi might not work out so well, when they go into the Jupiter dasha, their career is going to get a nice boost, because it's going to be an exalted planet in that chart for career. So this is very important, because it also shows how when you're doing predictive work with the dashas, it's not just how's the planet in the Rashi. You have to look at it in all the vargas. And when a planet is in good dignity in a varga, good things are going to happen with that area of life represented by that varga, by that divisional chart. If it's in bad dignity, there's going to be some struggle. Start with this, learn this. You're going to get a lot of good information from it. Once you learn this, then you can move on to more advanced techniques such as the avashtas, which primarily you want to look at, the yogas, all these different things. They'll make so much more sense if you understand the principles of temporary and natural friendships and dignity. Even if you use Jaimini techniques, it's fundamental that you know the dignities of planets and how they work, because that will allow you to see what's going to work well and what's not. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Start getting out some charts, looking at these certain things. Look at a lot of charts and see how it plays out. And the more you look at, the easier it'll be for you to assess this, then it'll become natural for you. So enjoy. If you have any questions, you can post at this video, although I more readily answer questions on the forum tropicalvedicastrology.net. That's tropical-vedic-astrology.net/forum. Thank you, and have a good weekend.